True.
But the reality is, what are you planning to do with that property? And what's the extent of knowledge that your conveyancer actually has? Because as with lawyers, it's the same thing. What's their experience? If you're talking about development as an issue, if you're talking about multi-parties coming in to do a development as an issue, you're really starting to get beyond the knowledge of most conveyancers. Most conveyancers will absolutely be able to do a standard sale, a standard purchase, and complete the transaction element.
Yes.
But the question is, can they give you the full advice that you're actually after, especially when you're talking about sites with maybe something a little bit unusual about them, be it covenants or easements, or even some planning issues that if you're planning to change the use of something,
Yes.
just having that additional bit of expertise. So, look, obviously from a firm perspective, we can do the whole lot and be a one-stop shop for people. But I also have other clients who will use a conveyancer some of the time and use lawyers when the complexity requires it, or we might have some involvement on the structuring element to go into a purchase, and then the client retains a conveyancer to do the actual purchase of the site if they view it as a very simple sort of transaction. Ultimately, it's a question of risk and a little bit of you get what you pay for.
Exactly.
As a firm, all of the property work we do is done by a qualified solicitor. We don't use conveyancers within the firm or unqualified clerks to do any of the work. So the peace of mind that our clients get is the fact that they have a qualified solicitor, and obviously myself as an accredited specialist working through their matters and getting that additional protection and level of service. Obviously, there's a cost associated with that, and it's just really important for people to make that assessment. And I've had people sort of make the initial assessment to go with a conveyancer and regret it a little bit down the track, or alternatively understand the limitations that the conveyancer might have and still get them to do part of the transaction, and we might advise on a separate aspect or the tax positions on it to make sure that no one's tripping over anything that they don't need to, and that the reality of it is that the client gets what they are planning at the end of the day. They're getting the right advice and they're going through things in the right way.
Okay, yeah. So I think before you mentioned about giving tax advice on different structures, formation, especially at the start, I always get this question all the time. I can get that sort of tax advice from my accountant instead from my lawyer.
Yes.
In your view, who should be taking that lead? Is it more from the accountant, or is it more from the lawyer taking that lead in terms of the right structure and so on?
Okay. That's certainly always an interesting question, because I certainly have that discussion as well. It's a bit of an experience-based question in that, again, we're accredited property law specialists. The sort of structuring that we deal with has very much that property perspective in mind. We're looking out for and making sure that the structures aren't tripping over, stamp duty being a key issue, but aren't tripping over any stamp duty problems, GST problems from a strictly property perspective. Certainly some accountants have that same skill set relating to property because that's their client base. And there are a lot of occasions when we actually work as a team with the client's accountant, because one of the issues that always exists as lawyers versus accountants is, and it's not a combative sort of thing, it's a reality thing, is that the accountants have a much broader knowledge of what the individual client's actual history and commercial structures are. We have clients with so many entities they couldn't name every one. I've had A1 sized bits of paper with full corporate structures on them, and in those sorts of circumstances, absolutely, I'd be working very closely with the client's accountant to make sure that the particular intent we have in mind will work within this broader structure, especially when you're using discretionary trust within structures and you're feeding in abilities to disperse out income and losses across broader structures. Yes, your accountant has to be in the picture for that, but at the same time, I've seen accountants have different skill levels, and lawyers have different skill levels. It's really getting that team in place and having the right people advising you and having that input from the right professionals who've had the experience in this space of doing what you want to do. So the short answer there is I don't think there is a right or wrong answer. It's not an issue of lawyers trying to take accountants' work or accountants trying to take lawyers' work.
Yeah.
The issue is what's the question that is needed to be answered. What's the goal ultimately with all of this? We have a lot of accountants who refer clients to us for the structuring advice specific for a project, specific for a particular group that is about to enter into something where, again, you might have separate independent accountants acting for each of you.
Yeah.
And, speaking on a meeting I just had a couple of weeks ago for a development, we've got two parties with two lots of land coming in to knock over some existing shops and building a larger building.
Yeah.
Each of their accountants have had different perspectives on what's the best way to do things. And each of those had pluses and minuses for each side. And really what we ended up doing within that context, in addition to obviously providing our own advice, is really helping the two sides understand that why their accountants were saying what they were saying, and helping the other party understand, well, that party's accountant is saying this for this reason, and then that helps them really achieve that balance. So we would have in that context, you've got two accountants because each party has their own, and we're the lawyer being instructed effectively to act on behalf of the group to create the structure. We're there trying to make sure that everyone understands why things are being said. There's a lot of technicality with all of this. And the thing is, yes, people should educate themselves, but at the same time, they are also entitled to rely on the advice that's being given to them. And when you're talking about a group of people and different accounts and different advice and different preferences, sometimes the lawyer is there to really make sure that you understand. We're translating the matrix sometimes to help people understand exactly what's the end outcome to this. And we're not just talking about something very technical and pie in the sky. What's the end outcome to this? What's the reality of it? So that people can make decisions. And that's ultimately what you want from any professional, whether it's a lawyer or accountant. Yeah. You don't want them just to give you advice in a highly technical sense that, frankly, you may not understand. And even if it was given to me, I may not understand sometimes when accountants and lawyers too much to jargon. What we try to do is really make things clear to people so that they're able to make the right sorts of decisions for themselves. Ultimately, we as professionals are inputting options and giving recommendations, but the decisions are ultimately those of the client. And we want to make sure that you actually are having an understanding of what is being said so that you can say, yes, I will do this or that, or yes, that level of risk is acceptable. No, that level of risk is not. It's really making sure that you've got the understanding of that. And your accountant is able to give you some of that as long as they've had the right sort of experience. So I'm not saying that there's a right or wrong to it. And I know I'm probably trying to have my bet each way. And certainly it's more self-serving for me to say that lawyers are always better, but that's not the case. It's important to make sure that the professional that you're seeing has the right experience for the project that you're doing. Because as I said, we do have a lot of clients referred to us from accountants, from financial planners, who are basically, yes, they have enough knowledge in the space to advise to a certain degree. And then that means they're also smart enough to go, that's when I need specialist help from an accredited property specialist like myself to be able to take it that little bit further and have that little bit more to it.
Yeah, I mean, I see it as more of a collaboration between the accountant and the lawyers to work together to achieve the end goal. Yeah, and
absolutely.
Instead of them working in silos, and then you are the sort of the developer is the middleman trying to liaise between those two, it's going to be harder to to understand the technicalities.
Absolutely. And it's important to have a team, to have the right team in place to support you as you work forward with this development. As a developer, you have enough on your hands with actually the physical work that's got to happen on the site. That including the background work to pick the right sites. You want to have a team that is cohesively working together and working over several sites. So that they have a good working knowledge of each other. And obviously, in an ideal context, have a billing arrangement or a fixed billing arrangement, ideally. That doesn't mean that you're worried that the lawyers and the accountants are talking to each other so much that you're going to have a surprise bill at the end of it. Have in this day and age with very much a fixed price or a value price mindset throughout all the professional services, lawyers and accountants, it's really important to have that discussion with your lawyer or your accountant, frankly, at an early stage. Know what you're paying for, know what you're getting. Yes, it absolutely streamlines everything, both for you as well as the lawyer and the accountant, that the professionals are dealing with each other. Just make sure that they're doing that on a cost basis that is sensible for you.
Correct.
That's I guess my one big thing.
From your experience, I mean, what would you say would be the top 3 common legal mistakes to avoid in property development?
Okay. I think
still at a high level, very high level.
Yeah, still at a high level. Well, as I said, the number one thing really is your structuring. I've had too many people because that has 2 problems with it. One, the rather obvious direct financial impact. You've done a structure that results in you incurring a stamp duty liability, a tax liability that you hadn't anticipated, and in that situation, there's a limited amount of things I might be able to do to fix that. So that's the number one thing. Think about your structures early, get them right early, and especially if you're having you're having partners in this development. I've seen too many of these things fall apart because people stopped getting along or had other priorities, and people can deliver what they had expected. It wasn't all in black and white, and now you're in a much more difficult position to.
It's a bit like an insurance policy. You have an insurance policy in place. Yes, you don't want to have a crash, but at least if you have a crash, you are covered. All parties are covered, and you don't get into that sort of battle. Okay.
That's exactly right. So really, as the number one thing, just think about that in your structures. That absolutely is an issue. As a number 2 thing, think about your site within the broader context that it's in. I've certainly, again, maybe as a little bit of a side effect of the COVID market, I've had people sort of look at sites, acquire them without necessarily looking forward to the fact that, hey, there's prospective works. We've got different extensive road works happening, rail works happening all throughout Melbourne and Victoria, for that matter. We've got a circumstance where really people should get that broader understanding. It's not necessarily, unfortunately, for the lawyers or the accountants to be aware of the specific ins and outs of the site. It's important to really have your ear to the ground, know what's happening there. The local agents, local people will know what's anticipated. We are ourselves, our office is based in Glen Waverley. It's going to be a very large hub on the suburban rail loop, which will mean that my office will be surrounded by a lot of construction work for the next few years. Now, that obviously impacts the particular site. It's got a great future. Once this is you thinking of suburban rail loop as an example, it's got a great future that's there. But in terms of your timing of your project, when you're anticipating to have things complete, what about problems? If you're talking about varying, removing covenants, that sort of thing, what are people worried about in the area? That sort of reality. And on the converse side of things, if you are buying something with a covenant or some kind of restriction on it, are you picking an area that's sort of gentrifying, that's changed over the years? This covenant that was registered in 1925 no longer has any kind of applicability. In that situation, you might be prepared to take that risk of taking on the removal yourself. And understanding the context of the particular site, rather than, unfortunately, we've had scenarios where we're dealing with it from a litigation aspect. People fighting with each other over old easements, old covenants, and you've wasted years and hundreds of thousands of bucks in the Supreme Court for something that, if you knew that was coming down the line, you budgeted for it, all well and good. But too many people sort of into the situation where the first they hear about it is when they speak to me. And when they speak to me, they're in the same breath thinking about whether they should sue their conveyancer or lawyer previously for not having given them the right advice. Sometimes that is correct, that they haven't given the right advice. Sometimes, actually, it's not an issue that would have ever been, in a contract vendor statement. It's a context issue of, did you know what was happening in the immediate area? property enrichment where someone had acquired it this was a lease issue, looking to run a particular sort of business. And then now that they're 2 years into it, being unhappy that the injecting rooms are relatively nearby. So those sorts of context aspects and getting the right sort of input, yes, making your own inquiries, getting the right sort of input, knowing what's happening around town.
Yeah.
As a number three, I'm just trying to think as a number three point, because really all of the points link back to getting the right sort of advice.
Getting the right structure and advice.
Yeah.
Early in the piece.
Right, and yes, correct. No matter
earlier in the phase, it would be less costly to untangle those challenges than once it's already progressed too far, and then you have
correct. When you're frankly, and speaking against lawyers to a degree, when you're engaging in litigation and you're going into court on things, you've already lost. Everyone's spending way more money. The only winner really is the legal system, the lawyers in that situation.
Yeah.
And look, we do help people in that situation. And our intent there, if at all possible, is to reach an equitable settlement between the parties, because that's cheaper for everyone, although not all parties necessarily listen to that. But if you get your ducks in a row early, if you get the advice and structures early, like you said, insurance is the perfect example. You're really putting yourself in the best position to avoid those problems down the track. And if those problems arise, that at least you have a set of guide rails that will stop you suffering the worst impacts of that. At least have your best position in place to stop you suffering the worst impacts of that.
Yeah.
And I guess as a very direct example, I've actually had a matter, it was a very long-winded sort of large-scale development where, although it's from start to finish, I'd actually written up the unit holders agreement between the parties, understood exactly what risks they were concerned about in terms of control, the different personalities that were in place. And unfortunately for the clients, what was anticipated played out. The different personalities and fractures got worse as the development progressed. Luckily, the building was actually basically towards completion or just about to complete before everything fell apart relationship-wise.
Yeah.
But the fact that agreement was there, and this was very heavily contested through multiple rounds of mediations with top-tier firms in Melbourne with QCs involved, etc. It was very hotly contested, but ultimately the parties didn't end up needing to go to the Supreme Court. There were threats of that.
Yeah.
They didn't end up needing to go to formal commercial arbitration. Again, there are threats of that, because the way that the initial documentation was prepared really created the limits to each side's position that gave the right kind of negotiating strength to each side to be able to force an outcome that worked for them. Yes, that was very hotly contested, and it still took many, many months to resolve. But the parties spent much less, and in the order of hundreds of thousands, much less, in legal costs than they otherwise would have if it actually had to go to court, if they had no documentation. That plus the adverse consequences on the tax side of things as well. That really was a good example to me of the value of those documents. Certainly, those clients weren't hugely happy at the beginning, paying for what was, very extensive sort of document, in a high. Well, actually, it was over $10,000 just to prepare the unit holders agreement. But in that sort of, and this was many years ago, and in that sort of scenario, certainly they weren't happy then, but by the time everything was resolved, they were quite happy that they had that document in place.
Yeah.
And have, this is both sides in that situation. Both sides are each other in the end.
Yeah.
Quite happy with the fact that this agreement was in place that stopped really the side that, well, from our client's perspective, the side that wasn't behaving from doing the wrong thing.
Okay.
So yes, that is definitely a very good example of the reality of these things. Sometimes sometimes a lot of this stuff, Alan, it sounds like theory. I'm doing all of this just in case.
Yeah.
When that just in case happens, you're very
Exactly. That's going to be costly mistake. You didn't do it, correct? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Look, let's start wrapping things up now. I mean, are there any questions that I could or should have asked but I didn't ask you on the final takeaway from today's talk?
Look, I think you've asked some very insightful questions in terms of what people should know. I guess the one question that I think is important for people to ask it's because we've spent a lot of this time talking about engaging professionals.
Yeah,
is really to have that clear discussion with your professional, with your lawyer, with your accountant.
Yeah.
And again, talking about team, bringing in the finance broker as well within that team, financial planners, etc. Making sure one, you have that team in place, but two, make sure that each of the members of that team understand exactly what their role is and frankly what the cost arrangement is, with yourself. Because unfortunately, when we're talking about professionals, there is a variety of charging methods and a variety of philosophical positions on how that's all supposed to work. And you're dealing with a property development where arguably the work is like a piece of string. No one knows exactly how long it is, but it's just there and you can keep chewing through it. And some people can keep chewing through it endlessly. So it's important to really understand and be asking as a client, as a customer, to be asking your professional, okay, what is the scope of the work that is going to be done? What is that going to cost me? Is that a fixed cost? If it's not a fixed cost, what are the limits to that? Or even if it is a fixed cost, well, okay, when it's outside scope, do I understand when I'm going to incur those extra costs?
Yes.
We as a firm philosophically do a fixed price model. So we give a fixed price at the outset of a matter and agree with that with you, and that way you know what you're up for.
Exactly.
Yes, things can sometimes crop up that are out of left field, that are unexpected, but in that sort of scenario, we obviously would then give you a choice to go, okay, we can assist with that as well. It'll be X fixed price to deal with that aspect if you like, or you might try X, Y, Z other options first. Say it is a dispute, not quite a dispute scenario, but leading in that direction. We can at least give some assistance to go, well, look, if you try and address these couple of things first, that either might resolve things without you incurring further legal costs, or alternatively, at least reduce the anticipated further legal costs that might have to be incurred. And it's really understanding that, when you're getting that advice, as we've sort of banged on for the past little bit, to get that right advice, to put yourself in the best position. Also make sure that you've got a clear understanding with your professionals as to what is being expected of them, what scope, what price. All factors into your feasibility, of course. Ultimately, the margin isn't infinite when you're doing the development. Everything's got to work at the end of the day.
Exactly.
And make sure you're asking those.
Beautiful,
questions. And then weigh that up. Are you getting the value that you want? Like I said with the conveyancer example earlier, you might want the peace of mind to have a specialist do absolutely everything in your matter, because yes, it will give you greater protection, greater peace of mind. Is that absolutely essential in every transaction? That's a risk consideration that any kind of client needs to make. And it's really weighing that up. We've talked a lot about getting that right advice, and I absolutely am advocating for the fact that you should get that as early as possible, but make sure you have a clear discussion with your professionals. Make sure that they understand what you want from them, and that a fair price is agreed that works for everyone.
Yep, beautiful. Yeah, no, I really enjoyed the insight you've provided to us today, Andre. I really appreciate that. Now, how do people get in contact with you for any specific legal advice about property in general, or also property development?
Absolutely. Easiest protocol is our website, so www.sharrockpittmanlegal.com.au. You can also give me a call. My direct line is 8561-3317.
Okay.
8561. Yep. So, I'm sure you can stick that on the.
I'll put that as well. Yeah.
Able to this. But look, you can reach out to me on the website. There's an inquiry form there, and it comes directly
Sure.
through our marketing system to me. That's usually the easiest way. And I think as a key point to understand, because as I said, we do work on a fixed cost basis, people can feel free to reach out to me on that inquiry form, and to have that initial discussion. They don't have to feel like suddenly there's going to be a bill with that first.
Yes, that's what I think. Most of the concern would be, do you provide like a 15-minute sort of consultation, session about what it's all about, so at least you can price the work, scope of work. Okay.
Correct. So, and that's absolutely correct, Alan. I mean, ultimately with us, the key thing, and as I just got finished saying in terms of having that cost understanding with your professionals, the key thing when you speak to me is that you're not going to get a bill until we agree on that cost. So we can have an initial chat. Ultimately the time length of that initial chat, I don't have a fixed time for that. It's an issue of I have enough of an understanding of what you need so that I can then give you a fixed price for the work that's going to come out of that. That's really the key thing to it all. So yes, I just encourage people, if they have any concerns or any problems that they need some assistance with, by all means, give me a call, send me an email, and then we'll have a chat, and we can work through things from there.
Okay, thanks very much again for your time, Andre. I really appreciate your insight again. So so we'll be in touch again.
Absolutely, lovely to speak to you as always, Alan.
Okay, cheers, mate. Thank you. Bye.
All right, thank you. Bye.